No, no, don't.
Okay, we're recording, and I caught Laura mid-sentence, which makes me super happy.
As always.
So we are welcome to the book club from the Dialogue Doctor Slack group. We are talking about Freaky Deaky by Elmore Leonard. But before we talk about it, let's introduce everybody that is present. I am Jeff Elkins. We're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about our name, what we're currently working on, our work in progress, and if we could get an ideal amount of sleep tonight, what would that ideal amount of sleep be? Is that the right question, Laura? Nice. Okay, I got the thumbs up. All right, so I'm Jeff. Works in progress. I am working on the. Laura and I are working together on the Dialogue Doctor book. I have a Vela coming out on Thursday. That we're recording this, which won't be the Thursday that this comes out, but the Thursday, it'll already be out by the time, the Vela will already be out by the time this podcast is published. So I'm working on a Vela called Nerds, the National Recently Deceased Services. It's about a group of bureaucrats who are tasked with being social workers for ghosts. So it's a comedy horror. That is about to get dropped, which I'm excited about. And I also have a novel in the works called Insider Out, which is fun. But yeah, so that's me. Who wants to go next? Faye, you go next.
Sure. I'm Faye, and I secretly hope that I was named after Faye Dunaway. You said talk about my name.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And what else? I am writing a superhero mom story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How much sleep do you wish you'd had this week?
Oh, I need 4 to 6 hours, but I'd love to have 8 to 10 hours.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. All right, Tom, go for it.
My name is Tom, which is a name I've always liked. It's very serviceable. Nobody spells it wrong. And it's, I don't know, it's worked just fine. I wake up at 5 or 5:30 no matter when I go to bed. So I tend to try to get to bed by like 10 p.m. so I can get at least 6 hours. And I am working on a crime novel called The Train Job, which I've been working on for a couple of years because of COVID. And I'm working on 2 Vela projects right now.
Nice. What are the Vela projects? Will you tell us?
I will, although one, I was inspired at the Career Author by Stephanie Bond, who's doing amazing serial things, but I was inspired not to copy what she's doing, but to try to do something that everybody else wasn't doing.
Nice.
So I'm doing one that's pretty much straight up in my genre. It's an action adventure, but it's set on a deserted island. And then I'm doing another one that is a haunted house romance that is going to be a choose your own adventure.
Awesome. That's fun.
So at the end of the episode, there is a 2-part choice, and you can go onto the Facebook page and vote for which you think should happen, and then I will write the next episode.
Nice engagement. Way to go. That's smart. I like that idea.
We'll see.
All right, Vince.
Vince Stanley, on the Slack group. I am writing a book on, it's mostly a drama. It's about women in power. And I like all the sleep I can get. That looks like 7 hours a day, typically, is best I can do.
Nice. Awesome. I didn't talk about it. I actually would prefer, like, if I had my ideal sleep routine, I would be able to subsist on like 4 hours. But I can't. I go a little nuts at 4 hours. So I need like 5 to 6. But if I could function on less sleep, I totally would, because there's a lot of stuff to do. Laura.
I don't know why you make me introduce myself. Everybody knows me by now.
Let's not assume.
I will introduce myself anyway. I'm Laura. I was actually named after Laura Ingalls Wilder, according to my mother.
Oh.
Yes. I don't know if you knew that about me or not.
Friend of 17 years, did not know that.
Yeah. I require somewhere between 16 and 20 hours of sleep a night. I typically get around 5. I used to in my youth. Oh, Daisy's going to join us today. Hi, Daisy.
Hi, Daisy.
In my youth, I could be really great if I slept less than 4 hours or more than 6 hours, but I couldn't sleep like 4 to 6 because I'd go a little nutty. So, but in my old age, I now require 1,000,000 hours of sleep a week. So I'm so old.
Nice. So old.
And this week, clearly, I am not getting it because I am a grouchy bear this week.
It's really funny. Can I call you a grouchy bear in the office tomorrow? Yes. Nice. It's gonna pay off.
I'm very fond of bears, and I think everyone knows this week that I'm grouchy. I don't think that there's really, I mean, I really feel like it's kind of stating the obvious.
That's true. That's true. Okay, we'll leave it. I won't do it then. All right, let's get to the book. We are talking about Freaky Deaky by Elmore Leonard. Now, I will say, typically at a book club, I'm like, no spoilers because people are listening. With this book, though, I am going to spoil the crap out of it because it is homophobic. It has lots of racism. It is over sexualizes women in only a way that, like, 80s R-rated should have been X-rated movies can do. Yeah, I don't think it should be read. So I'm good to like go ahead and like spoil the crap out of the plot. Now, I will say it is like the rumors are true. It is some of the best dialogue I've ever read. The techniques are amazing and to be studied. So if you're going to read it as a work in dialogue, like a study in dialogue, like we did for this podcast, it is worth it because, man, you can learn. I learned from reading the book some techniques that I'm going to start practicing. So the dialogue's incredible, but the content I do not care about spoiling. Yeah, Tom, go for it.
I just wonder if you found that true outside of the character's thoughts. Although, as Vince was mentioning before we started, that the third person narrative is also sort of very close third person, so it's within character's head, because I wasn't seeing that.
Yeah, I think it's a freedom of language that the characters unnecessarily use. I don't think any of them actually needed to use the N-word to get their characterization across, but they do routinely, and not in a way that is like a commentary on race that is appropriate or helpful. It's just a slang term they're throwing around all the time. Same with some of the homophobic stuff. I don't know that using that language, I will say using that language did not improve their characterization. I think it's just a mark of, this book was written in 1988 and it's a hard-boiled crime novel in 1988. I think it's a mark of the time that this book was written in. And it is what I would expect to see in a 1988 R-rated movie, is kind of how it rolls. So I think we've progressed past this kind of use of that language and don't need to dwell in it. Yeah.
So the misogyny and the white supremacy is rampant throughout the entire novel, to the extent that the first scene where the main character is taking a statement from a rape victim, he is sexualizing her and thinking about really how attracted he is to her.
Yeah.
Right?
He's a terrible person.
Yeah, he is.
They're almost all kind of really awful people.
They are.
It really makes it difficult to connect. I will say, like, it made it really hard to connect to the novel because all of the characters are awful. But yeah, Laura's, and so my thing though is about the sexualizing of the rape victim is that is not in any way hinted that is the wrong thing to be doing with the rape victim. Like, and it goes on through the whole novel. In fact, at the end of the novel, he's celebrated for like having this romance with this victim of sexual assault. It's not that he is a terrible person, but that is, in the world of the novel, him sexualizing a rape victim as a police officer is not the reason he's a terrible person. In the world of the novel, he's a terrible person for all different reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this because I am completely not
Mhm.
on the other side of this
I
discussion.
know you're not defending it. Yeah, you're just
defending
throwing
it
out.
in any
Yeah.
way. My,
you're just-
my question is simply whether you felt those were Elmore Leonard's beliefs being expressed in the novel, or whether you thought he was making characters who were characters like a person like that in that time and place in that job would have been.
Yeah. So this is the first time I've read Elmore Leonard, and this is the only novel of Elmore Leonard's I've read. So I don't know if these are Elmore Leonard's beliefs or not. I will say, if it was an intention to be like, oh, sexualizing rape victims is something that Chris does, because that's part of his character, I don't think he pulled it off in a way that lets us know that is not Elmore Leonard's personal beliefs. Which I think if an author is going to do that, they should have a side character be like, hey, she's a sexual assault victim. Or she should say, hey, and it shouldn't end with their budding romance. Like, that's kind of like, I think, yeah, I don't know. Anyone else have thoughts on that before we actually talk about the good things in the book?
It comes up in a very tangential way, I think. Because you're totally going to ruin it. He originally, the main character was in the bomb squad, and he was talking with a therapist, and he was worried because a bomb detonated and killed somebody. They had to do a post-analysis review of him, and kind of it came up like, why would he be interested in sexual assault? I don't know if that's strong enough to make your case, what you're worried about, but there was, I don't know, that I listened to a whole bunch of interviews with Elmore Leonard. I didn't get that impression. I think he was more capturing the way people spoke.
Yeah, I think that this book is dated in the time that it was written. And that there are things about that time as a society we've decided we're not going to mimic anymore. So, and I'm not saying this book isn't a great work, right? Like, the dialogue's amazing. Elmore Leonard's a fantastic writer. I'm just saying, unless you're reading it for craft study, I don't think you need to read this book. So I don't mind spoiling it. Does that make sense? In the same way
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, in the same way that I won't ever make Laura read Hemingway again. I will make her read it.
I actually found this book very reminiscent of Hemingway.
Yeah, I mean, things are happening in this book. It's not like in Hemingway. I mean, bombs are going off, people are dying. There's
One bomb.
No, there's two.
There's like three, isn't there?
There's three. Yeah, there's Booker, there's Mark, and then there's the ending where they blow up Robin and Skip. See, I don't care. I'm ruining the whole thing.
If you could pull out the parts with Chris and his dad.
Those were great conversations.
That's actually,
except that his dad's a little racist, but it did match his character. Yeah.
But like the interaction between the two of them was, sometimes it was really cute, but other than that, these people were.
Yeah, I did like the ending where his dad is on vacation and there's a woman in the background in the hotel that Chris doesn't seem to know about, which I thought was funny. There were times where the book really made me laugh. But yeah. So I've got 4 things to talk about that I loved. I want to talk about how he uses realistic dialogue and like introduces emotion in dialogue. I want to talk about dialogue and action scenes. I'm going to read from the big cast scene at the end, which is freaking amazingly done. And then I also want to like look at a conversation between Chris and Donnell and to talk specifically about how Leonard is using dialogue tags. So those are the things that I want us to specifically hit. Before we get into those, what did y'all find craft-wise about the book that you were like, man, that's something I'm going to try to emulate in my own writing? And Laura, don't say homophobia.
It moves really quickly, the pace. Like, he's really good at keeping things going, pace-wise.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely has beats to it. And I think, what do you think is causing that?
I mean, the scenes are really, the segments of the scenes are pretty short, and he's he switches point of view fairly quickly too, like really smoothly as well.
Yeah, his point of view switches super smoothly and very quickly. And I agree, the scenes are short. I also think, we talk a lot in the Slack about like writing dialogue only first drafts. You get the feeling that this thing was written as a dialogue only first draft, because dialogue is at the core of this thing. Like every scene centers on a conversation, even when he's doing flashbacks. So he has these moments where like characters are remembering things. This was something this was one of the things I learned that I didn't pull a chapter to read from. Specifically, it's the first time Robin is remembering something. So I think it's like chapter 6. She's like stalking. So let me tell this story before we get into talking about it. The story is about Chris, who is a bomb detective and was a 60s radical, where he kind of learned about explosives and then became a bomb cop, and then is at the beginning of the book transfers from bomb cop to sexual crimes. He runs into a woman comes in named Greta, who is accusing this wealthy, very famous man in town who produces movies named Woody of raping her. And then we have another plot going on where there are these two people who have gotten out of prison. They were arrested for blowing up the federal building in Detroit. Does anybody remember?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's the federal building in Detroit back in the 60s. And they've been released from prison, and Robin and Skip, and Robin believes that Woody and Mark, the rich guy who produces movies, and his brother turned them in. So Robin is determined to get Skip to get dynamite to blow up Woody and Mark, and she hatches an elaborate plan to steal all of Woody's money. And Woody has a driver named Donnell, who used to be a big player in the Black Panther movement. So those are the characters, the main characters: Greta and Chris, and then Mark and Woody, and Chris, Skip and Robin, and then Donnell. And there's hijinks in the middle. Chris gets kicked off the police force for pushing this sexual assault case against Woody, kind of in order to impress Greta, which is weird. And then Robin and Skip start scheming with Mark to steal Woody's money, and then Mark accidentally gets blown up. And then it all ends in a big showdown in Woody's house, where Woody seems to be drugged. They don't come out and say it, but he seems to be on drugs at the end. Greta is on the couch on acid. Chris, because Greta has come to confront Woody, because nothing ever happens with her sexual assault case. So she comes to confront Woody and actually take the deal he originally offered her, which was like, let me just pay you off. And so, but they drug her instead. So she's tripping out on the couch. Robin and Chris have planted a bomb in the garage. No, Robin and Skip have planted a bomb in the garage. Chris shows up. Donnell and Chris scheme together as they're being locked in this like living room. And they end up setting their own bomb for Robin and Woody. And no, I'm sorry, Robin and Skip. And they blow up Robin and Skip in the end. And Greta gets all the money. And that's how it ends. And she goes off to Hollywood to be a big star. And that's the book.
Wow.
I just ruined the book. Did I miss something? Good summary of the book. Okay. So so all that. So Faye was talking about the scenes move really fast and the perspective moves really fast. Vince, I know you wanted to talk about the perspective a little bit.
The perspective is neat. One of the parts in chapter 4, I think it was page 33 of the book I was reading. What's interesting is that each chapter is written in the perspective of a different character. And in chapter 4, Skip takes acid, and then the point of view goes from him to like a third person omniscient through him. It gets like kind of meta.
Yeah.
And so like normally it would be she said this and then I responded that she said this and I responded, and then it switches in chapter 4 and and it says she was speaking now. So he does these really fascinating things where I don't think you could ever look them up. They're very creative.
Yeah, so and we can read a little bit of that. So he starts off in chapter 4. He's like, Skip swallowed a tiny square of bladder acid smaller than the nail of his little finger, dropped it with a sip of beer, and got comfortable to wait for the cleansing head show to begin. The seams of the plastic chair were coming apart, but fine, deeply cushy. The only thing that bothered him was the light. It was so bright in here, facing that bare white wall, no one on the lamp. It smelled like Robin had been painting, trying to make the dump presentable. So like that's the start where it's like normal third person perspective. But then if we jump a page later to page 35, it's got that trippy perspective. He dropped his hand to the back of his head and felt his ponytail hanging there, behaving itself. He watched Robin take a sip of beer, saw her eyes raised from the can, not wearing glasses now, saw her tongue touch her lips, and waited for it to come at him, flick out like a snake tongue. There was a little snake in her. So like, it's just this like weird, he gets this weird trippy perspective like you're talking about. That's like not really third person, but kind of strangely third person. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to read an example of it. That's wild.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that because one of the things I noticed, and I knew you would notice, Jeff, was that the whole book is a series of conversations.
Oh yeah.
But the parts that aren't, the third person that Vince is talking about, it stays in third person the whole time, but it is a really close third person, which almost feels like dialogue, which makes it the whole book feel even more like it's all dialogue. There's long sections, especially with Donnell, where it's still third person, but it's super inside Donnell's head, and you still feel like you're having a conversation.
Yeah, and what he'll do to make that go, I noticed this technique he was using, where he like in the middle of he's got these like, he never goes more than 5 paragraphs without somebody talking. But sometimes what that talking is like, Donnell will be remembering something, and then he remembers what the person said, and Leonard puts that in dialogue in the middle of it, like in the middle of the paragraph. I've never seen anybody do it before, but it was super engaging because you could actually, and that dialogue in the middle of Donnell's memory was often in a different voice, if that makes sense. So Donnell is like remembering here, it's very meta. Donnell is remembering hearing this person, but instead of being like, and then he remembered that this person said blah, 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 or and then he remembered that this person told him that the car was out back. It'd be like, and then he remembered that Mark said, yo man, the car is out back. And it's like, that's in quotes, but it's like in the middle of this paragraph of Donnell's memory. And it's this, he does it with Robin too. Robin a lot of times remembers what people told her, and she's remembering it in their voice in the middle of a paragraph of prose that like makes that prose. Because usually if you get more than 5 paragraphs, I start to skim, but I didn't skim any of it. It made it very, it kept me hooked in. But yeah, it was
Fight Club's written this way a little bit.
Oh, really?
By Chuck Palahniuk.
Yeah.
He kind of uses that as a way to disguise the many of the twists within the book. But then it also reads in a really interesting way. Anyway, go ahead.
Fascinating. No, that's really interesting. I don't think I've read that one. I think I watched the movie for that one. I'll have to go read it because I love his work. Talk about dark. Yeah, and scary. Okay, so we've talked about perspective. We've talked about how fast it moves. Anything else that stuck out to y'all about what you loved about his technique? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and this is kind of interesting, a lot counterpoint to the idea of dialogue being about the emotional journey, which is none of the dialogue in this book is about anybody's emotional journey. It's all smoke. None of the exposition comes from what people are saying. Everything people are saying is about showing an attitude to the people that they're saying it.
Yeah.
too. And the third person sort of interior monologue really juxtaposes that, especially with characters like Robin or Danelle, where everything they're saying is nothing at all like what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So let's read. I'm going to read a section of that. I'm on page 7. If anybody wants to read along with me in chapter 1, because this is the first time I noticed what you're talking about, Tom, where I was like, oh my gosh, I love what he's doing here, where they're like, there's this like false bravado with all of the characters a lot. And they're never, like you're saying, they're never actually talking about what is happening. So there's a guy named Booker who blows up in the first chapter. See, spoilers. Don't read it. Just read it for the craft. There's a guy named Booker. He's sitting on a green chair, and Chris and Jerry are the bomb squad, and there's a bomb underneath his green chair, and they've been brought to look at Booker's to like defuse the bomb. So Chris and Jerry took time to look at each other. They didn't say anything. Jerry got down to inspect the sliced open seat cushion between Booker's muscular legs and said, Booker said, another one goes home. I'm going to sit here on high explosives. And the motherfucker goes, Jerry stood up, looking at Chris again. Well, he's cool. That's a good thing. Chris said, yeah, he's cool. As Jerry walked around the back of the green leather chair, Booker, sitting upright, raised his head. Hey, I got to go to the toilet, man. Bad. Jerry reached over the backrest to put his hand on Booker's shoulder. You better wait. I don't think you can make it. I'll tell you what I have to make. I mean it. Jerry said over Booker to Chris. The boy looks fast. Used to run from the narcs in his pony joggers, one of those pony down delivery boys, Chris said. Yeah, I imagine he's fast. Booker was upright with his head raised. Wait, now, what are we saying here? If I'm fast, bet to it, man. I'm fast. Chris said, we don't want you to get the idea that you can dive out of your chair into that little swimming pool and make it. Booker said, in the jacuzzi, I get in there, I'd be safe. I doubt it, Chris said. If what you're sitting on there, if it's wired and it's not one of your friends being funny, Jerry said, or if it's not a dud, Booker said, yeah, what? Chris said, if it's a practical joke, or some kind of warning, then there's nothing to worry about. But if it's wired, you raise up and it goes, I could get in the jacuzzi quick enough, huh? I doubt it. His feet stay on the floor, Jerry said. Remain in the house. So they end up leaving Booker, and he totally blows up. But that's just an example of like the dialogue where they're kind of like, it's a real high tense situation. It's high emotion. But Jerry and Chris are like having this nonchalant conversation about whether or not he's fast enough. But you can hear in Booker's like stuttered sentences, his like short, quick sentences, and his desire, you can hear his desire to like rush and get off this thing and his anxiety. So like the comparison between the emotions between the two cops who are chatting, specifically shown with their body language and how they're like walking around the chair. And then you hear Booker's urgency. He does it through the whole book. It's this really great kind of parallel of emotion in the book. Yeah. Tom, was that kind of getting at what you were talking about?
Oh yeah, they totally want him to blow up.
Yeah.
They go outside to give him a chance to blow up.
Blow up.
But they've steadfastly denied that they're telling him he could make it.
Yeah.
They plant the seed and then he's like, oh, you think I can make it? Oh, no, you can't make it.
Yeah,
and then they go outside and they wait for him to try it.
Yeah.
Because then they don't have to do their job.
And while they're sitting outside waiting for him to try it, they talk about Chris's girlfriend. And they have a full-on conversation. This is the conversation they're having outside. I'm talking about you're leaving the squad. I know what you meant. I haven't told her yet. I'm waiting till I get reassigned. Maybe homicide, huh? I wouldn't mind it. Yeah, but would Phyllis? Chris didn't answer. They smoked their cigarettes and could hear fire equipment arriving. Jerry said, hey, I was kidding. Don't be so serious. So like they're having this conversation about like where he's going and what he's going to do as fire people are showing up and they're waiting for this guy to blow himself up. Yeah, it's crazy. Anything else stand out to y'all that y'all want to talk about before I read another scene?
But the very last thing I had, and I'll be quick, is that he does this masterful thing. He does this masterful thing around page 272, where he's shown Chris to be completely inept at talking to women, including his own girlfriends, because he's so emotionally bankrupt.
Yeah.
And so he presents you yet another conversation like that, except at the end, you realize that Chris was just there to get a very different kind of information out of her. And when it happened, as a reader, it surprised me. And I was like, good job.
Yeah, Chris definitely has, like, that's another thing he does in the book that is interesting, is that the lead character, the vehicle character, 100% goes through a transformation. He changed it. Even, like, I think it was right after that, around like 276 or 275, he starts talking about how he watched Lethal Weapon and how Mel Gibson would just shoot people. And this, like, it changes the way he behaves, because then he just, like, has this moment where he just starts shooting at a person. But yeah, it's this, like, he definitely goes through this transformation of, like, awkward, weird, lost and wandering to, like, man on a mission.
Is being recorded.
Yeah, man on a mission thing, which was interesting. I'd be curious to know, so as y'all read it, what character, if any, did you emotionally tie to? No. Tom's like, nobody. Faye, did you connect with anybody?
No, I kind of wanted to like Chris because he seemed like the main character, but I couldn't do it. I just felt sorry for some of them, or just was kind of turned off by them. They were so nasty.
Yeah, I really disliked Robin. She's the one I disliked the most.
She's probably one of the most manipulative.
Yeah, she was the worst. And I'm like you. I tried to follow Chris as, like, the vehicle character that I wanted to, like, emotionally connect to, but it's just hard. He's such a gross. Okay, so let's talk about, we got to stick to good things. Dialogue in an action scene. Page 79. Chris is gonna take on this guy Juicy. And so what I love about what he does here is that there's lots of action going on. There's Juicy and three young guys Chris has been tricked to go into this parking lot. He thinks he's going to meet Robin there, and he goes there, and instead of meeting Robin there, he meets Juicy and these three young guys. But Chris has just had this, like, Lethal Weapon moment, and so he's got his Glock with him, and he is going to chase them down with his Glock. And so what struck me about the action scenes that Leonard writes is that and we talk about this a lot as a community, is that, like, you have to have dialogue and action. And so Leonard, the whole scene is just, like, him talking to Juicy. So let's pick up, Chris has pulled out his gun, and it says, and Juicy's holding a tire iron. So Chris pulled his Glock from his waist and looked at the three well-built young guys as he palmed the slide, racked the gun, and was ready to fire. He said to them, "What do you do now? You run fast as you can. I don't ever want to see you again." Juicy, taking his time, was coming toward him now, saying, "Man, is that thing real? That's a strange looking piece, man. It shoot bullets or what?" So, like, we have Juicy approaching him, and he's, like, putting words in Juicy's mouth, which I think is great, because it's actually, like, he's combining that body language of, like, coming toward him, taking his time, with this, like, three questions in a row. So it gives this, like, really slow pacing. Chris said to the three young guys, "I'm going to count to 2. The three guys stood, posed at rest, dull-eyed, slack, hips cocked at studied angles. Chris said, 1, raised the Glock and fired at the metal door behind them, past the nearest guy's head, and they were running as hard as the hard sound filled the alley, and Chris said, 2. So, like, I love the like way he's using dialogue there, because he says Chris said one in quotes, and then it gives all of the description, and Chris said two in quotes, and then there's the period. So that's all like one sentence that he does that piece in, which is just fun. But anyway, it goes on like that with Chris and Juicy talking as this like dialogue happens. Even down to the place where Chris starts like catches Juicy in a car and then starts just shooting at the passenger seat to try to get Juicy's attention. Anyway, anybody else pick up on how he's using dialogue and action scenes that I'm missing, or anybody want to push back and be like, no, he didn't do that?
Oh, he go ahead, Tom.
I was just saying no, but just read the last two sentences of that section.
Of the joke at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he shot up the car and he's like destroyed the windshield. Was it Donnell? That's Chris said, was it Donnell? Juicy nodded up and down. Say it. It was him. You feel better now? I don't owe him nothing. He busted off my tooth one time. Was in a men's. You could have told me it was Donnell and saved your car getting wrecked. Juicy said, what, this ain't my car. Yeah. Little jokes at the end of all of the sections. And I also love, we haven't talked about this yet, but he's great with character voice. You know who's speaking all the time. Laura, you're nodding. Do you want to jump in on that?
It was one of the things that one of like two things about this book that made me keep at it as long as I did, is he really does a great job of dropping his dialogue tags in the middle of conversation, but there's never a question of who's talking, and there's no counting. Okay, that was them, that was them, that was them. Okay, so this is this person. You can tell he pulled off the differences in like accents and the way different people speak in a really natural way that didn't feel artificial at all. It's one of very few writers that I've read who have done it to this level of competence, and excellence, I guess, is a better word than competence.
Yeah, he's really good at it. Anybody else have thoughts on?
Yeah, I do. I was reading Stephen King's On Writing, and he referenced Elmore Leonard as being really good at like 3 or 4 times throughout that book. But I listened to a number of interviews with Leonard, and what he would say was he specifically liked minorities because the way they spoke was very different. And that's why a lot of his books have minorities in them.
Huh. We'll just leave that there. That could go two ways. Yeah, no. And he does like the dialect he's got, and it's not just the minorities. Like Skip and Chris are both white men who have similar political leanings in the 60s, and even their voices sound very different. Every character is very different.
Right. Chris comes across as really clean cut.
He does, yeah, and very unable to communicate what he's thinking and feeling. Whereas Skip over talks. Skip is always talking and very much expressing his desires all the time. One of the things I love that Leonard does is how he uses dialogue tags. So we're talking about how he leaves them out, but he puts them in for like cadence, which I thought like, wow, he's really doing this exceptionally well. So like, I'm going to read from 326 and 327, which is the ending, because don't read this book. 326 and 327, where he's talking, it's Donnell and Chris kind of figuring out that they're about to be blown up and that they need to double cross Skip and Robin. Well, I guess Chris isn't double crossing them, Donnell is. I don't know. It gets confusing at the end. So
Hey, Jeff, I'm
yeah.
sorry, before you read, do you have a chapter number? My pages
Yeah.
are very different than yours.
Oh, I'm
End
sorry.
of 28.
End of
End of
28.
Thank
28.
you.
It's the last page of 28, like the last thing of 28. And I'm going to skip around in this conversation a little bit because I really want to hit the dialogue tags. And there's a couple specifically that I want to look at. So they come here, Donnell said, planting his hands on the desk, getting right to it. They have a box of dynamite. I make him put it in the garage. I go out there, it's gone, and the car's locked, and there's no way to open the garage up. The electric thing you push don't work, and the light's out. You ask Skip about it? What? Ask him how he's going to blow me up? I know he's set it someplace. Stay out of the garage. You'll probably be all right. How would he work it? You look around the house. Enough. Box of dynamite ain't that easy to hide. Where's Robin and Skip? In the kitchen mostly. Let's say you put the dynamite in the car, Chris said. A Mercedes, right? I remember from when the limo blew it up with his brother. So like that line right there is one of the ways that he uses dialogue tags just to slow down the pace, right? Like, so they're going back and forth with no dialogue tags. And now Chris is going to engage in what's actually going on. So there's an emotional shift in the conversation where Chris is going to like plug in to actually solving the problem. And so you need to slow Chris down. So he gives Chris 3 sentences as opposed to 1, right? Like the fast dialogue slows down to 3 sentences, and he sticks that dialogue tag right in the middle of all 3 sentences. All right. Let's say you put the dynamite in the car, Chris said. A gray Mercedes, right? I remember it from when the limo blew up with his brother. He would do it. When you drive in and out, you use the garage door opener, right? Like, so it's that like taking that dialogue tag and forcing it in there. We don't need to know that Chris is saying that, right? Like, there's only 2 people talking. We know it's Chris, but he's using it intentionally just to slow down that cadence, which was really good. He does it later in the same conversation with Darnell. He starts giving them, as they build to this like climax of what they're going to do, he starts slowing them both down by adding this body language in. So I'm skipping down the 2 kind of 3 or 4 paragraphs down. I'm glad to hear you say that. That's Chris talking. Not this soon. I had a gun. Man, they fucked my head good. What was your cut? I'm not in this deal. You mean now you're not, Chris said. We don't have a gun, but you know what we do have if you haven't thrown it out, right? So again, a change in tone. So he throws a dialogue tag in there to create space between 2 thoughts. You mean you're not now? That's one of Chris's thoughts. Chris said, we don't have a gun, but you know what we have if you haven't thrown it out. So he's sticking it, even though you don't need to know that that's Chris talking, he's sticking that in there just to like slow that cadence. Donnell says, so yeah, what do we have?
Sorry,
Oh,
Jeff,
yeah.
hang on a second. So for those of you who aren't reading along with Jeff, there are a couple of other really interesting things that Leonard does specifically in that line that are what we talk about all the time as it relates to cadence. So not only did he put the dialogue tag right in the middle, but after we don't have a gun, he uses an ellipse. So we as the reader are waiting for Chris, right? Like we see those 3 dots and we translate it in our head to a long pause. And then he says, but you know what we do have, and then he uses an M dash. And again, that M dash is signaling to us as readers, we aren't seeing, oh, that's an M dash. I should hold for a 2-second pause. We just know in our brains that an M dash means that we're doing that layover thing if you haven't thrown it out, right? Like, so it's that's an excellent example of the way we talk about using punctuation to change the cadence of a sentence.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Can I just add on top of that?
Yeah, dude.
Did you notice the Chris said is not for the first sentence. It's the beginning of the second sentence, which is something else that I've almost never seen. And then he does an interesting thing, the next thing down with Donnell, where he says, he took a moment to say, and then another moment to say. But that thing where it says, you mean now you're not, period. Chris said, we don't have a gun, but you know what we do have? I've never seen anyone do that before.
No, but it totally works. It's that like, we get this like whenever we talk about punctuation, like Laura's saying, or we work with an author, we get this question of like, what's the appropriate punctuation for the dialogue tag? And like the answer that Elmore Leonard would give you is like, whatever makes it sound like you want it to sound, right? Like, but yeah, it's that, it's that just kind of like, and this is again, like talking about cadence of a character, you can already hear it. And then like, this is part of Chris's cadence, because we talk about words, body language, cadence, and pacing. This is part of Chris's cadence. He's like fast, 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 fast. Moment of reflection, 3 sentences at a time, dialogue tag in the middle, sometimes interesting punctuation, right? Like it's that he's got a rhythm to his speech that really sets his voice apart. And it's what like Vince said earlier, where it's like, oh, he sounds very clean cut. I think that's part of what gives him that clean cut sound, is that like building to points and then slowing down to make a point makes him sound very disciplined and structured at times, but just kind of building that voice over and over. Laura, were you going to say something else? You look like you wanted to jump in. Okay, so let's talk about the line that Tom pointed out. Keep going. What do we have? 5 sticks of Austin powder in a black bag in this room the last time I saw it. So let's talk about that sentence. That again is Chris. It's 5 sticks of Austin powder, comma, in a black bag, period. In this room, comma, the last time I saw it, period. Right? So like intentionally spacing out 4 thoughts and giving it that like rhythm of like a hard break in between as he delivers this point, like slowing that character down. Donnell stared at him. He took a moment to say, it still is. Another moment to say, but what good is it to us? So like talk about like intentional use of a dialogue tag to slow down a emotional moment and just to like sit in that emotional moment as Donnell kind of starts to come online with what Chris is saying. There's a wire in the bag, Chris said, and a battery. The battery's probably shot, but I noticed there's a flashlight on the bar, another one by the TV. Has them all over the house, Donnell said. The man's afraid of the dark. Getting up from his desk, Chris said, bless his heart. So like, if we compare what we first read, where it's like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with no dialogue tags, and then we get to the end of the chapter where he wants to slow down because they're having this moment of revelation, every line has a dialogue tag and body language to slow it down. And it's that like, intentional and strategic use of these dialogue tags to create the feeling of the exchanges that is was really amazing. I was blown away by that scene. Literally like a bomb, because more bomb puns. For those on the podcast that can't see, Laura is shaking her head in disapproval at me. All right, any other thoughts on his dialogue tags or anything else you want to say about how he's like using punctuation and spacing out?
Yeah, italics. Did you notice italics in this?
I did notice italics, Vince. I don't want to bring it up.
Oh, it was great.
So he uses italics the way italics are supposed to be used to help the reader see emphasis on a specific word, right? Like that is what the italics are for. Again, when we know how to read and we understand what these things do, the italics are to give us emphasis. And actually, if anybody knows code, the tag for italics is actually EM because it means emphasis, right? So like, it's just to trick the brain into thinking that we need to say that word a little bit harder, or we need to put a little bit more emphasis on that word. That's how italics are supposed to be used.
He's not using them for inner thoughts. He's not using them for an entire character voice. Like that's not what he's using italics for. Sorry, go ahead, Vince.
So the coolest thing was he would use it in one syllable inside of a word.
Yeah.
So the word sentence, like the TEN would be italicized, would be senten. So the thing is, it would be really nice little way. He always used them, I think, typically in a dialogue, a section of dialogue on a one specific word and one specific syllable, and it really it had a nice little punch to it. I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, I think there's a difference between I don't want to speak for Leonard, but this is what I see in his writing. I think there's a difference between how I think a lot of us write, which is we're trying to get the words on the page to like convey something, versus what a master does with dialogue, which is starting with how it sounds authentically to you and then using the words to mimic that sound. Does that make sense? Like there's something about what he's doing where he's utilizing all of the tools that he has to create in your imagination this sound of these character voices. If only some of the characters were actually redeemable, we might have. Yeah, anyway. Yeah. I did want to read one of his big cast scenes, because his big cast scenes where he's got like 3 to 5 people in a scene, again, are like a masterwork. So I'm going to go to chapter 28, Laura. And which piece do I want to read of this? I'm going to do, it's page 318 for me. So it's like 3 pages into chapter 28. If you read 28, there's like a section where Donnell's at the front door, and then that like breaks with white space. And then they let Chris into the house. And I'm going to skip down to after Chris is in the house a little bit. So what's happening is all of our characters, all of our remaining living characters are in a room together, right? Skip, Robin, Woody, Greta is high on the couch. Chris has walked in, and Donnell is kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. And they're getting ready. The idea is that Skip, Robin, and Donnell are going to kill Woody with a bomb. And Greta showed up to like take the deal that Woody offered her, because no one actually cares about her sexual assault. And Chris has come chasing after Greta to like save her. Actually, no, Chris is coming to confront Robin, but just happens to stumble into Greta being there. He parks behind her car. Yeah. So I'm just going to pick up in the middle to get a flavor of like how he does this, like 5 people talking. Greta stood waiting. She gave Chris a weak smile. What's the matter? She shrugged, raised her hands, and pushed up the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Her face was drawn without makeup. What did they give you? Behind him, Donnell, she fell in the pool. And by the way, that is behind him, comma, Donnell, colon, she fell in the pool. I don't, why he decided to use a colon there instead of a comma. I don't know, but he did. She tripped, Skip said. He reached out, waited, and Robin handed him the joint. Donnell's voice behind Chris said, yeah, shit, that's what she did. She tripped. Chris looked at Robin. You give her acid? I didn't give her anything, Robin said. Skip did. Skip said, hey, what's wrong with you? You don't tell him something like that. He could go fucking crazy on us. He said to Chris, it was just half one. She wanted it. Ask her. You tell her what could happen? Hell, she's okay. Don't sweat it. Chris stepped toward him, swiped a leg from his chair with his foot, taking it out from under him. Skip yelling, hey, banging his head on the wall as he hit the floor. Chris stood over him. You tell her what could happen? Man, look at her. She's fine. You slipped it to her, didn't you? Ask her. Go on. How she feels. Chris said, don't move. As he turned to Greta, Robin said to Skip, are you going to take that from him? So it keeps going. They go for like another 2 pages. But there's a couple things that I loved about it. One, there's not a formula to it where like this person, this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. At the same time, I know what everyone is doing in the scene at all times. Like I have no question where everybody is. I have no question like where their spatial arrangement is. Nobody gets lost. We haven't heard from Donnell, but he speaks in like 3 more lines. Like nobody gets lost in the scene. They're all in there, and he's varying how he uses dialogue tags and mixing it with body language so that each line is different. Everyone sounds like themselves, and again, he's got that like really great emotional feel. He never comes out as like Chris was angry that Greta was drugged, right? Like we can just read that he's angry. We just know that he's angry from the way that he speaks. Yeah, it's a really, his big cast scenes are really impressive. Yeah.
And Leonard does this a lot too, where Skip could have just said, "No, I didn't tell her." He's always avoiding the answer.
Yeah.
Like Leonard does that a lot. He never uses the word no.
Yeah. And they talk, or like part of Robin's character voice is that she's always inciting something, like so words, body language, cadence, and pacing. One of the topics Robin uses all the time is she's always trying to like get people to fight with each other. So even in that scene, in that little moment, like, "No, I didn't do anything," Robin said, "Skip did." Right? It's that like, you're like, "Oh yeah, that's Robin talking." Yeah. So anyway,
That no, the not using no is specific to Chris's character, because other characters use it very specifically and very strategically, but he doesn't use it because that character is always like deflecting.
yeah.
But what I really liked about the scene, and you said it at the beginning, Jeff, is that the pacing of the scene is based off of what the characters' actions are.
Mhm.
The characters are speaking when the characters need to speak. They're not speaking because, oh, we haven't heard from this person in a long time. They're speaking because that's where the action in the scene is. And that's actually really hard to pull off. It really takes a critical editing eye to be able to see that the pacing of the scene is off when somebody is talking when they're not supposed to talk.
Yeah, and it's a weird, I think the art of it is that like the dialogue is following the action in the room, but he's keeping everyone engaged in the action of the room. So you don't lose two people, like the conversation, even when Skip and Chris are talking, he keeps it so tight, and Robin interjects so that you don't feel like, oh, we've lost everyone else in this scene.
Everyone in the scene has a purpose. They're
Yeah.
all engaging in the action. Otherwise, they would leave the room.
Yeah.
And they don't. They all stay for a reason because they're all engaging.
Yeah, totally.
You always know who's talking. Like you don't have to go back, and kind of figure out who it was. He makes it very clear.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about the book? We lost Tom in here somewhere. Anything else about the
I have a question. I have a
Go
question for Laura. Did you read the whole thing?
No. I honestly, like, I really had every intention of reading it, but it was causing me so much anger and so much frustration that for my own mental health, I was trying to read it because I appreciated the excellence of the dialogue, but I couldn't make it through. I tried really hard. I even actually switched to the audiobook of it. So the Leonard estate has received payment for this book for me twice, because I thought, okay, if I can't get through it from a reading perspective, maybe I can get through it from an audio perspective. And that was actually even worse for me. So, but yeah, I really tried. But I was really impressed with the body language. And we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't really hone in on it. One of the scenes where it really struck me, how intentional he was about the body language, was in the first scene with the therapist, and he's like shifting uncomfortably in the chair, and the therapist is tapping his pen on the notepad, right? Like you can just see the tension in the room. He did a really great job of, when we talk about body language, the difference between action and body language, and how body language is for communication. For a book that is so focused on like catching criminals and criminal behavior, it actually surprised me how little action there was and how much body language there was. Now, obviously, a lot of that is because most of the chapters focus on conversation, even as conversation is happening amongst action. But I just found that really interesting.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah. And unlike Hemingway, I actually can appreciate the craft of what Leonard does, despite the fact that I feel like the topics that he writes about can be buried and never retrieved.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts on the book? Tom, you got any final thoughts on the book?
The line that made me laugh the hardest, which was early on, which again sort of clued in that none of the dialogue was going to be what you thought it was going to be, which is at the beginning, Chris is talking about how he used to do plainclothes work in a park where gay people were often attacked. So he would dress up as a gay person and stroll through the park, asking for it. And the other person says, that sounds like entrapment. And he says, it does, doesn't it? I transferred to arson. I had some experience in that area from before.
Yeah.
And I will say, I've read some other Leonard. I mean, I recommended this one for Elmore Leonard just because I had read it, but I've read half a dozen, and they all have that Sopranos sort of like, there's nobody to like. So don't say, oh, maybe it's this book, I'll go try another one. Like, I would say read Elmore Leonard for the sort of amazing technique stuff we talked about, but I don't think you need to go plow through his back catalog.
Yeah.
Although remember,
as a master of dialogue, not a sorry.
The show Justified is based on one of his short stories, which is one of the best dialogue shows out there. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Absolute tops.
That's cool.
Fire in the Hole.
Yeah.
Okay. Faye, any last thoughts?
No, I'm thoughtless.
Okay. I don't think that's true.
That is not true.
Yeah. Under no circumstances is that true. Vince, any last thoughts?
I thought the book was a total blast. I loved it. And the one thing that Leonard was describing in an interview is he said that we're often taught as authors to make sure that your villain is like a perfect complement to the hero. And what Leonard did in this one, and he does in others, is he said, for example, Chris is the hero in a way, and then it would make Skip the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Skip and Robin may be combined. So he said, oftentimes he'll make the villain not necessarily smart like the main character, but extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
So they're not like a 180 out. They're like 190 degrees out.
Yeah, and they are very. I see what you're saying, because they are very like off kilter.
They're incredibly unpredictable.
Yeah.
And Chris seems to have it all together, and he would probably have an easier time against a smarter opponent.
Yeah, that's true. If they weren't so chaotic, it would probably be an easier case to solve. But they're incredibly chaotic. Yeah. Okay, so in the Slack next for the next book club, I'm going to make us vote on one of three books. Anxious People by Friedrich Buchner, which is am I saying his name right? I'm not. That's actually a theologian.
It's Bachman
Bachman, thank you.
with two N.
Friedrich Buchner is a theologian I read a lot in seminary. Yeah, Friedrich Bachman is the author who writes fun, amazing dialogue. So Anxious People is about a crime. They're trying to solve a bank robbery, and it's a fascinating kind of closed door book where all of the suspects are viewing an apartment. It's really great. He's also the author of A Man Called Ove. So great book. The other one we might pick from, the other one we could vote on is The House of the Cerulean Hill by TJ Klune. I've had 4 people now contact me and say we have to do that as a Dialogue Doctor book club book.
Yeah, that's not what it's called at all.
Isn't it?
The House on the Cerulean Sea.
Thank you. The House on the Cerulean Sea. Man, I'm just going to butcher every name and book. Or the third one is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which I read and has amazing dialogue because one of the characters speaks in musical chords, which is a fascinating. Laura's like, no, I'm not doing it. It's a great book. You're going to love it. All the science. It's so good. So much science.
You know what? I have come to the realization that you all have created this book club to torture me.
Yeah, you're not in the good place. This is the bad place.
This is the bad place. You thought the Dialogue Club was the Dialogue Doctor Book Club was the good place.
I've always wanted to be in a book club, and now I'm in a book club, and I feel like I'm being tortured over and over and over. There's so many great books out there. I love to read. You all are making me hate reading.
Project Hail Mary is an amazing book. And I've previewed all 3 of these books already. So there's
I saw the look on Faye's face. I don't think that Faye agreed.
Faye, have you read it? You loved it. It was great.
I read the first 20 pages and then
Yeah.
I stopped.
He wakes up in a
See?
all right.
And Faye
Well, you get to
read-
vote. You get to vote in the
Faye
Slack. So just
read
vote it
all
down.
of this, and Faye read all of Hemingway.
Yeah.
So if Faye can't make it through 20 pages, I'm not going to make it through the first sentence. Sorry, Daisy really wants in on this argument.
Hey,
She does
Daisy.
not like it when I get upset.
Daisy, do you want Project Hail Mary?
Do you want to say hi?
Daisy wants Project Hail Mary. Right, Daisy? All right, so we'll vote. I might add another book because Project Hail Mary's being vetoed, even though I really want to do it because the character speaks in chords.
Yeah, you can read it.
I
you can have
have.
a book
I've already
club
read
about
it. It's great.
Again, you can have a book club about it.
I love the science. Andy Weir's science. It's like, no, I'm a doctor. There's so anyway. All right, so we'll put other suggestions in the Slack to vote for the next book club. Thanks everybody. Any last words before we sign off?
Good night.
Good night. Good night, y'all.
Well.
I'm gonna stop the recording.